Good morning and welcome to the April, not the cruelest month, 2024 open meeting of the Federal Communications Commission. Madam Secretary, will you please introduce our agenda for today?
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Good morning to you and good morning, Commissioners. For today's meeting, you will be presented with 2 items and 5 enforcement actions for your consideration. First, you will consider a second further notice of proposed rulemaking, which would propose to require the implementation of 1 or more georouting solutions for wireless calls to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline to ensure that calls are routed based on the geographic location for the origin of the call rather than the area code and exchange associated with a wireless phone. Second, you will consider a declaratory ruling, order, report and order, and order on reconsideration that would reestablish the Commission's authority to protect consumers and safeguard the fair and open Internet by classifying broadband Internet access service as a telecommunications service and classifying mobile broadband Internet access service as a commercial mobile service, exercising broad and tailored forbearance, and reinstating straightforward, clear rules to ensure Internet openness. Third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth, you will consider separate enforcement actions. This is your agenda for today. Today's first item is titled Implementation of the National Suicide Hotline Act of 2018 and will be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. Trent Harkrader, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you so much, Madam Secretary. Now, before we turn to Mr. Harkrader and the Bureau for their presentation, we have a very special guest. I'd like to introduce Ann Mazur. She's the Chief Executive Officer of EveryMind, a nonprofit organization with a mission to strengthen communities and empower individuals to reach optimal mental wellness. As CEO, Ann advances EveryMind's mission by executing the organization's strategic plan. She ensures EveryMind has the infrastructure and financial resources to meet its ambitious goals, maintain an extensive network of partners and funders, and she advances local and regional agendas for thought leadership and mental health advocacy. She is also a crucial steward of this organization's culture and values. Now, the most important thing you should know is that she is here today because she has spearheaded the expansion of mental health programs in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is in our own backyard. And she has been providing direct mental health support and education to over 50,000 children, youth, adults, older adults, veterans, and their families. And I'd like her to start off our discussion of 988 today and tell us what she knows from her role leading EveryMind and from her many, many years of experience with mental health, wellness, and suicide prevention. So take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and esteemed commissioners. I extend my sincere gratitude for the opportunity to address you this morning. Representing EveryMind, an organization deeply committed to enhancing mental health and wellness, I speak with conviction on the critical importance of implementing georouting within the 988 infrastructure. Our work spans diverse demographics, focusing particularly on underserved communities, stigma reduction, and improving access to mental health services. For over 50 years, our 24/7 hotline has been a cornerstone of support, offering free and confidential assistance to individuals in crisis. As one of the original centers in the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline Network, we have continuously evolved, pioneering crisis hotline tech services in Maryland over a decade ago. Our dedicated team of 50 frontline hotline crisis counselors anticipates providing supportive listening and suicide intervention on over 50,000 calls and texts this year. Despite our efforts, challenges persist, especially in routing calls and texts from transient areas such as Montgomery County and the National Capital Region. Allow me to illustrate the significance of georouting with 2 poignant examples from our hotline. Maddie, a crisis counselor on our team, received a text through 988 from Eli, a 16-year-old, who bravely confided that his mother was contemplating suicide. Eli texted 988 looking for help. While providing Eli with much-needed support and guidance on how to approach the situation with his mom, Maddie reached out to the Montgomery County Crisis Center, guiding them through the situation with vital information to assess the need for a mobile crisis team response. Once it was realized that the situation was dire, with compassion and astute questioning, Maddie was swiftly able to coordinate with the local crisis services. Maddie's guidance ultimately led to the dispatch of the mobile crisis team, highlighting the profound impact of leveraging local resources in moments of crisis. Conversely, imagine receiving text from a Maryland number, but the person in need is actually across the country. Crisis counselors like ours across the nation face immediate hurdles. They rely on the visitor to share specific location details, which can be uncomfortable. For example, one of our crisis hotline counselors, Erin, answered a call from Raina, a 28-year-old experiencing a panic attack and after a devastating breast cancer diagnosis. Despite her Maryland area code, Raina is now living in Utah and was calling from a parking lot, unable to afford her medical bills. Erin, unfamiliar with Utah services, focused on validating Raina's feelings and ensuring her safety for the rest of the afternoon. Our counselor, Erin, knows the services to help connect people facing trauma, isolation, and in need of social emotional support in Maryland, but not in Utah. Erin's options to provide support to Raina become more limited and more uncertain. The absence of georouting limited Erin's ability to provide tailored support, underscoring the urgent need for a more effective system. How many people have a different area code from where they reside? I do, right? Nowhere is this more evident than in Washington, D.C. area, where the Pew Research Center estimates that 55% of residents with a cell phone have a number from outside the district. According to the Census Bureau, approximately 36 million Americans move residence every year, yet they rarely change their cell phone number. Georouting offers a viable solution to these pressing challenges. By directing calls and texts to the nearest crisis center while safeguarding confidentiality, georouting ensures swift access to support during moments of crisis. Moreover, it empowers organizations like EveryMind to identify areas of high demand, facilitating targeted resource allocation and enhancing service delivery. Since the launch of 988 in 2022, the demand for mental health services has surged dramatically. Annual call volumes increased 50% in the first year, an additional 30% in the second year. Chat and text support requests to our hotline have risen by 500% in the same period, with a significant portion originating from young people under the age of 24, highlighting the urgent need for accessible mental health services. Despite this escalating demand, awareness of 988 remains low. Polling conducted by the Pew Charitable Trust last year revealed that only 13% of people are aware of 988's existence. This lack of awareness, coupled with ineffective routing systems, creates layers of complexity in service provision. As one of Maryland's 9 crisis call centers for the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, EveryMind is at the forefront of providing vital support to those in need. Our unwavering commitment to mental health advocacy compels us to wholeheartedly endorse the implementation of georouting within the 988 infrastructures. In conclusion, I urge the Commission to approve this proposal on georouting to ensure equitable access to timely, local mental health support and crisis services, to ensure that every caller and texter can receive the same high-quality, effective, and life-saving services that Eli and his mother did. Together, we can save countless lives. Thank you for your attention and dedication to this critical issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anne, for your words today and for setting the stage, describing how important what we are about to embark on it really is. Really appreciate you being here. And with that, Trent Harkrader, our Chief of the Wireline Competition Bureau, and our Wireline Competition Bureau staff, let's proceed.
Good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Thanks to Ms. Mazur for that inspirational message and for reminding us what we are working towards. This morning, the Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a second further notice of proposed rulemaking that, if adopted, would take an important step towards improving access to life-saving services provided by the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. I'd like to thank the Bureau team, of course, for their hard work, as well as our colleagues in the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, the Office of Economics and Analytics, and the Office of General Counsel for their crucial review and input. I would also like to thank our federal partners at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services. Seated at the table with me from the Bureau are Liz Drugula, Associate Bureau Chief from our front office, Heather Hendrickson, who's a Deputy Division Chief, fresh in from Chicago this morning, and Mary Wolf. Mary will present the item.
Good morning. Thank you. The United States continues to face a suicide and mental health crisis. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, suicide was a leading cause of death in the United States in 2021, resulting in 48,000 deaths. The 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline provides critical life-saving services to people in suicidal crisis or emotional distress, and is a vital component of the nationwide response to this ongoing mental health crisis. Over the last several years, the Commission has acted to facilitate access to the 988 Lifeline's vital services by designating 988 as the 3-digit dialing number for callers to reach the Lifeline, and by requiring covered text providers to route text messages to 988 to the Lifeline. Since the nationwide transition to 988 in July 2022, the Lifeline has received and routed over 9.6 million calls, texts, and chats. Based on the original design of the 988 Lifeline system, however, callers may not receive support from local crisis centers. Approximately 80% of calls to the 988 Lifeline are made from wireless phones, and the system currently routes those calls to crisis centers based on a caller's area code and exchange, which presents challenges because many callers have wireless phones with area codes that do not match their physical locations. These discrepancies may also be more prevalent among certain groups, such as college students and service members. Mental health and crisis counselors have opined that connecting callers to local crisis centers is essential to ensure they have access to local public resources and public safety resources. Moreover, local crisis counselors may be more knowledgeable about unique community stressors and other regional, cultural, and economic factors impacting callers in distress. This has highlighted a need to improve the routing of wireless calls to the 988 Lifeline so callers are connected to crisis centers based on the caller's location through a process known as georouting. Georouting refers to technical solutions for directing calls based on a geographic location for the origin of the call without transmitting information about the caller's precise location. This second further notice of proposed rulemaking, if adopted, would continue the Commission's work to provide meaningful access to the 988 Lifeline and build on the progress made by all stakeholders to date by proposing to adopt rules requiring wireless carriers to implement a georouting solution for calls to the 988 Lifeline. The second further notice would also seek comment to obtain information necessary to thoroughly and transparently consider georouting solutions that could fall within the scope of that mandate and identify any remaining work to implement a georouting solution. Next, if adopted, the second further notice would seek comment on a variety of aspects related to implementing a georouting solution for the 988 Lifeline, including technical specifications and limitations, required routing data and transmission methods, necessary infrastructure and system changes or upgrades, testing requirements, and timelines for deployment. The second further notice, if adopted, would also seek comment on routing challenges and any potential or needed georouting solutions for non-wireless calls and text to the 988 Lifeline. Lastly, the second further notice, if adopted, would seek comment on the Commission's authority to adopt rules requiring wireless carriers to implement one or more georouting solutions for wireless calls to the 988 Lifeline. The Bureau recommends adoption of the second further notice of proposed rulemaking and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. We'll start with Commissioner Carr.
Thanks so much. Thanks to the Bureau for your presentation on this. A year ago, when I was in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, I had the chance to visit the Helpline Center, which is an organization that provides mental and behavioral health services, and it answers over 100,000 calls to 988 a year. And that's where I had the chance to meet Janet, one of the Helpline's counselors. She's someone that makes a difference in people's lives every single day that she goes to work. The stories she told me were very similar to the ones that we heard Ann just relay about the communications between Maddie and Ellie. Now, one of the points that Janet and her talented colleagues conveyed to me when we met was that 988 has been making a real difference since the FCC helped stand it up just a short while ago. She noted that this easy-to-remember number has resulted in people reaching out for help earlier in the life cycle of a crisis. And that's resulted in their counselors being able to be more effective in the help that they provide. In fact, they estimate that since 988 has been rolled out, they've seen about a 200% increase in the number of calls and texts coming into the center. But they also thought there was more the FCC could continue to do to help improve the system. In particular, they flagged call routing. With mobile phones and number portability, as we heard, people don't always call 988 from the same geographic area associated with their area code on their phone. And that means someone reaching out for help in South Dakota could have their call routed to a helpline located somewhere else, or as we heard with the call between Aaron and Raina. There has to be a way to route these calls to the local helpline while continuing to protect the privacy of callers and making sure that they're not discouraged from reaching out for help. That's exactly the idea that the chair has put forward today. And so I want to thank Chairwoman Rosenworcel for her leadership and work on this issue, for seeing how we can further improve this system. I want to recognize Senators Barrasso and Senator Lujan as well for their leadership in effort to advance the bipartisan 988 Lifeline Location Improvement Act. This is legislation that would ensure that we have the strong footing necessary to make sure that this vital resource continues to be accessible. And finally, I want to thank the staff again of the Wireline Bureau for their work on this important issue, and the item has my support.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chairwoman. First, I want to thank Ms. Mazur for your testimony, for your powerful advocacy, what you've been doing for folks that are having mental health issues. That was a startling statistic you said here. Chat and text service needs up by over 500%. That is something that is we should all take note of. And more than anything, I am proud that we have been able to move so quickly here to deliver critical results for the American people. All the pieces in many ways have lined up for the 3-digit code that we're talking about here, 988. Since the nationwide transition in July of 2022, the Lifeline has, as we heard, received and routed 9.6 million calls, texts, and chats. I would call that success, but as we've heard quite clearly, there is more room for us to do better, to continue to grow. Our primary responsibility here at the FCC is to ensure that meaningful access to the Lifeline, and we've done this by setting forth reliability, resiliency, outage reporting requirements, and today we continue on that great theme following the Council of Mental Health Advocates proposing to require geo-routing solutions for 988. Currently, as we heard, when a caller dials 988, the call is routed to a crisis center. But where those majority of calls are made, from a wireless phone, we do have that opportunity to make it even closer, even better, so that it performs. Mental health and crisis counseling experts have virtually unanimously advised that connecting callers in crisis to local crisis centers is vitally important. And so the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, SAMHSA, the Lifeline Administrator, industry partners, we've all completed that successful proof of concept trial of the solution that we're talking about here for georouting. And this will continue to require cooperation between those carriers originating the calls, the Lifeline Administrator that controls. And obviously, there's more need for us to get the word out, as we've heard, for folks that are experiencing this very critical issue. And so thank you to the chairwoman for leadership. Thank you to the hard work of the team here. It really deserves our full pride. It has my very full support.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. So when I'm reflecting on area codes in my own family, there's a 305 number, a 312 number, a 267 number, and a 585 number within my immediate family under my roof. So for those of you who are, and then of course a 306 number for my family back home in Canada. But if you're defining the quadrilateral that draws, the corners would be obviously Northern Virginia, Rochester, New York, Chicago, and South Florida. So, personally, I would appreciate being geolocated whenever there's any sort of a need for services like this. Obviously, we're just in a different era in terms of what it really means to provide services to people where they are. So I want to thank the team for their hard work on bringing this into the modern era.
Thank you for drawing that quadrilateral. Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My first ever site visit as a commissioner was to join Chairwoman Rosenworcel to meet the amazing team at EveryMind in Rockville, Maryland. And thank you for hosting us, Ms. Major. I walked away that day with a fuller appreciation for the importance of making the 988 Lifeline available to the public and gratitude for the hundreds of volunteer centers and staff that provide support to callers across the country. As the 988 Lifeline has become available, we have learned about ways to improve support for callers, and today we take steps towards such an improvement. Doing everything we can to ensure that individuals experiencing a crisis can receive the support they need saves lives and is simply good policy. I look forward to seeing the record develop with solutions and ideas about how we can implement this next important step. And thank you to the staff of the Wireline Bureau for your valuable work on this item.
Thank you, commissioners. As you've heard, not far from us here at the Federal Communications Commission, in a nondescript, low-slung building in Montgomery County, Maryland, is an organization called EveryMind. They are one of over 200 call centers across the country that respond when people dial 988, the Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Now, at the FCC, we know 988 well. We helped set up this easy-to-remember three-digit number nationwide. We made it possible for anyone, anywhere, to reach out for help with this number through call, chat, or text. But those are the technical details. Because at this agency, we don't really know what it's like to be on the receiving end of those calls. The people at EveryMind do. And along with Commissioner Gomez, as you heard, I visited EveryMind to learn more about what responding to 988 looks like on the ground. And after spending some time with EveryMind, two things were really, really clear. First, the people answering these calls are extraordinary. They listen and respond thoughtfully and carefully to everyone who reaches out in crisis. The work they do saves lives. Second, the people answering these calls face challenges because connecting those who reach out to 988 to nearby help can be complicated. Today, we know that 80% of the calls to 988 originate from a wireless phone. And right now, those calls are based on the area code associated with that device. But as we've heard, for many people, the area code on our phones no longer matches the place where we live. That means if you have a phone number from Maryland, but you move to California and you dial 988, you would still be routed to a call center in Maryland, like EveryMind. And I know from my visit that the people at EveryMind will do everything they can to assist you, but it goes without saying that they know more about how to get you assistance in their own backyard than they do across the country in California. I think it's time to change this. And if we do, I think we can save more lives by getting more people connected to resources nearby. That is why today we propose to introduce georouting. When georouting is used, wireless calls to 988 are routed to call centers based on the nearby towers that wireless calls use to connect. This provides a more accurate picture of a caller's true location while still protecting their privacy. More importantly, georouting means those responding to 988 inquiries have a lot more knowledge of local resources and are better equipped to assist the caller with getting the help they need. Now, on this front, I want to point out that we are already on the right track. Last year, I wrote to the nationwide wireless providers, urging them to begin work on georouting. So I really want to thank them for the headway they've already made to date with development, testing, and trials. I also want to make clear that for georouting to work with 988 across the country, the Department of Health and Human Services and its administrator of the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline is going to have to incorporate the solutions we are proposing here directly into its process. This is vital. We stand ready to assist because as we develop these technical solutions, we know we benefit from having experts in mental health work with us every step of the way. I also want to thank Representative Cardenas, Senator Padilla, Senator Tillis, and Secretary Becerra for joining me last month when I first publicly introduced the idea of requiring georouting for 988. I also want to thank the counselors of EveryMind and Ann Mazur, who leads their efforts, for being here today, for the gracious way they open their doors to us, and for the services they provide to people in the community. They are heroes in our own backyard. In addition, I want to thank the staff responsible for this rulemaking, including Callie Croker, Elizabeth Drugula, Trent Harkrader, Heather Hendrickson, Jody May, Kiara Ortiz, Christy Schumann, and Mary Wolf from the Wireline Competition Bureau. Brenda Boykin, Ken Karlberg, John Evanoff, David Firth, Austin Randazzo, Rasul Safavian, and Rachel Ware from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. Thomas Derenge, Garnet Hanley, Eli Johnson, Roger Noel, Susanna Larson, and John Lockwood from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau, Terry Kavanaugh, Richard Mallon, Erica Olson, David Sanzel, and Shin Yu from the Office of General Counsel. Parmesh Janapura, Stacy Jordan, and Eric Ralph from the Office of Economics and Analytics, and Jocelyn James, Joy Ragsdale, Jamie Saloom, and Shauna Wilkerson from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities. We're going to get this done. And now let's proceed to a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next item on today's agenda?
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, item 2 on your agenda is titled Safeguarding and Securing the Open Internet, and will also be presented by the Wireline Competition Bureau. And Trent Harkrader, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. Mr. Harkrader, welcome back. When you're ready, please proceed.
Good morning again, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. The Wireline Competition Bureau is pleased to present for your consideration a declaratory ruling, report and order on reconsideration that would reestablish the Commission's authority over broadband internet access service. I would, of course, like to thank the entire Wireline Bureau team for their dedicated work on this item, as well as our colleagues across the agency who contributed, including those in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs, Enforcement, Media, Public Safety and Homeland Security, Space and Wireless Telecommunications Bureaus. I would also like to thank the Offices of Communications Business Opportunities, the Office of Economics and Analytics, the Office of International Affairs, and the Office of General Counsel. Seated at the table with me from the Bureau are Adam Copeland, Deputy Bureau Chief, and from the Competition Policy Division, Jody May, Division Chief, Chris Laughlin, Deputy Chief, and Mason Sheffa. Mason will now present the item.
Thank you, Trent, and good morning, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. High-speed internet connections are indispensable to every aspect of our daily lives, from work, education, and healthcare, to commerce, community, communication, and free expression. Since 2017, there has been no federal oversight over this vital service. The item before you would reclassify broadband internet access service, the consumer broadband service that we use and rely on every day, as a telecommunications service under Title II of the Communications Act of 1934 as amended, and would reestablish the Commission's authority to protect consumers and safeguard the fair and open internet, which protects free expression, encourages competition and innovation, and is critical to public safety. First, the declaratory ruling would classify broadband internet access service as a telecommunications service and classify mobile broadband internet access service as a commercial mobile service. It would find that reclassification would provide the Commission with additional authority to safeguard national security, advance public safety, protect consumers, and facilitate broadband deployment. It would find that classification of broadband internet access service as a telecommunications service represents the best reading of the text of the Act in light of the marketplace reality of how broadband internet access service is offered and perceived today, as well as the factual and technical realities of how broadband internet access service functions, and that such reclassification accords with Commission and court precedent and is fully justified under the Commission's longstanding authority to classify services subject to its jurisdiction. And it would make clear that the Commission will exercise its preemption authority on a case-by-case basis to preempt state or local measures that interfere or are incompatible with the federal regulatory open internet framework. Second, the order would establish broad, tailored forbearance, including no rate regulation, no tariffing, no unbundling of last-mile facilities, and no cost accounting rules in the Commission's application of Title II to broadband providers to ensure that the regulatory environment protects consumers and achieves other important public interest responsibilities while not unnecessarily stifling investment and innovation. Consistent with the Commission's approach in 2015, the order would not forbear from portions of Title II that protect consumers and competition, preserve enforcement tools, protect consumer privacy, provide access to infrastructure, support disability access, and promote universal service. In order to account for the changing national security landscape, the Commission would also retain its authority with respect to broadband providers under parts of sections 214, 218, 219, and 220. Third, the report and order would reinstate straightforward, clear rules that prohibit blocking, throttling, or engaging in paid or affiliated prioritization arrangements, and adopt certain enhancements to the transparency rule to require broadband providers to disclose certain network practices and performance characteristics for the benefit of consumers and the broad range of participants in the internet ecosystem. It would reinstate a general conduct standard that prohibits unreasonable interference or unreasonable disadvantage to consumers or edge providers. It would provide an exception for reasonable network management. It would make clear that the Commission will employ a case-by-case review under sections 201 and 202 to ensure that internet traffic exchange practices do not harm the open internet. And it would establish a multifaceted enforcement framework comprised of advisory opinions, enforcement advisories, Commission-initiated investigations, and informal and formal complaints. Finally, the order on reconsideration would partially grant and otherwise dismiss as moot 4 petitions for reconsideration filed in response to the 2020 Restoring Internet Freedom Remand Order. The Bureau recommends adoption of this item and requests editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now hear comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
The internet in America has thrived in the absence of 1930s command and control regulation by the government. Indeed, bipartisan consensus emerged early on that the government should not regulate the internet like Ma Bell's copper line telephone monopoly. In the Telecom Act of 1996, a Republican Congress and a Democrat president came together and agreed to preserve the vibrant and competitive free market that presently exists for the internet unfettered by federal or state regulation. 1 year later, Congress directed the FCC to issue a report definitively reviewing the terms Congress added to the Communications Act of 1934 in that 1996 enactment, including the distinction Congress had drawn between a lightly regulated Title I information service and a heavily regulated Title II telecommunications service. The FCC, chaired at the time by a Democrat and President Clinton appointee, did so in the 1998 Stevens Report. The FCC Stevens Report determined that internet access is a Title I information service under the statute. For decades, that bipartisan position held. It held through the remainder of the Clinton administration. It held through all 8 years of the Bush administration. And it held through the first 6 years of the Obama administration. Every FCC chair across those nearly 20 years, Republican and Democrat alike, repeatedly affirmed that broadband remained a Title I information service. The FCC did so again and again and again and again. Indeed, while activists on the political fringe lobbied for years to persuade the FCC to change course and regulate the internet as a public utility under Title II, the FCC never wavered, not once. Classifying the internet as a Title II service remained the third rail of communications policy, both unlawful and misguided. All of that changed in a flash. In fact, the years of bipartisan consensus vanished over the course of just 117 seconds. On November 10th, 2014, President Obama published a YouTube video calling on the FCC to label broadband a Title II telecom service for the first time and to impose sweeping new government controls on the internet in the name of net neutrality. President Obama's 1 minute and 57-second video was the culmination of an unprecedented and coordinated campaign by the executive branch to pressure an independent agency into grabbing power that the legislative branch never said it had delegated. Indeed, on the very same morning that President Obama released his video calling for Title II, activists showed up at the home of the FCC chairman and used their bodies to blockade his driveway, demanding that he classify the internet as a Title II service. They returned to his home again that very same night. Chairman Wheeler would later testify and write an email suggesting that he believed that those activists that showed up at his home did not act independently from the White House. The pressure campaign just continued to mount. Just weeks later, Title II activists rushed the dais during the FCC monthly commission meeting, obstructing an official proceeding, and unfurled a Reclassify Now banner behind the heads of FCC commissioners before security intervened. It's also why, as you know, we now have security sitting on both ends of the dais. It was that event. And just days before President Obama released his Title II video, Jeff Zients, who serves today as President Biden's chief of staff, but was serving then as President Obama's director of the National Economic Council, took the unprecedented step of visiting the FCC chairman in his FCC office, the house call, if you will, so that he could deliver a message to the FCC chairman about President Obama's upcoming announcement on Title II. Now, why this flurry of pressure from the White House in November of 2014? It's not just because people are coming off of a midterm election loss. As FCC emails show, the FCC chairman was just days away from circulating a draft decision to the commission that would have adopted net neutrality rules, but stopped short of going full Title II. The White House decided that it had to stop this FCC plan before the FCC chairman took it public. So it acted to derail the compromise path that the FCC chair had been trying to chart. The Wall Street Journal ran a deeply reported story on all of this titled Net Neutrality, how the White House thwarted the FCC chief. It describes, quote, an unusual, secretive effort inside the White House led by two aides acting like a parallel version of the FCC itself, end quote. Subsequently, internal FCC communications that were later obtained by Congress only confirmed and added additional concerning details to that reporting. Now, the legislative branch, they caught wind of the executive branch's power play. It did not sit idly by. The chief of staff to the then majority leader of the Senate, Harry Reid, wrote to the FCC chair. He said he'd spoken to the White House again and, quote, told them to back off Title II. Went through once again the problems it creates from us, end quote. Majority Leader Reid's chief of staff followed up, adding, my main point to the White House is how can you declare that regulations written in the 1930s will work fine for 2014 technology? It's a good question. Let Tom do his job and this will be fine, he ended. Except the White House did not let the FCC chair do his job. The president intervened. He flipped them. Reflecting on the White House campaign while testifying before Congress, FCC Chairman Wheeler was asked about President Obama's November 10th announcement and whether it had an impact on the Title II debate at the FCC. He testified, of course it did. Continuing, he said, when Jeff Zients came to me and said, this is what the president is going to do, that was substantial significance. The testimony is true. Emails confirm that the FCC stopped the presses on its compromise or hybrid approach, delayed the vote, and quickly went to work drafting a decision that went full Title II, just as the president had demanded. Chairman Wheeler would later write an email where he described this episode as his Damascus Road experience. Now, ever since President Obama flipped Chairman Wheeler, there has been no turning back. Title II is now just a matter of civic religion for activists on the left. They demand that the FCC go full Title II whenever a Democrat is president. Everybody knows what's expected. Indeed, President Biden made restoring Title II a campaign promise. And well, Jeff Zients is back in the White House. So yes, millions of people have filed comments at the FCC on Title II and net neutrality over the years, but none of them mattered. None of them persuaded the FCC to go full Title II. Only the president mattered. Now, this also explains why the FCC has never been able to come up with a credible reason or policy rationale for Title II. It's all just shifting sands. And that's because the agency is doing what it's been told to do by the executive branch and just cobbling together post hoc rationalizations as it goes along. Now, you may wonder, why am I starting out this statement recounting this bit of FCC history? Well, for starters, I think it tells an important part of the story of Title II. The FCC's position on Title II didn't simply evolve over time. The Overton window on Title II did not just naturally shift. President Obama forced the FCC's hand. And I understand that there's many people, including some here, that would just like to sweep that entire episode under the rug. Forget about it. I'm not one of them. But I'm also starting out my statement here for a more fundamental reason. After all, it's not surprising that the executive branch tried to pressure another component of the federal government into doing something that the president thought would be in his benefit politically. In many ways, that's a story as old as the Republic itself. But what is surprising is that it succeeded, that the courts sanctioned this power grab. You see, the framers understood the nature of those in power, and they set up a series of checks and balances to avoid government overreach. Chief among them is the Constitution's separation of powers. In Article 1, the people vested all federal legislative powers in Congress. As Chief Justice Marshall put it, this means that the important subjects must be entirely regulated by the legislature itself, even if Congress may leave the executive branch free to fill up the details. That didn't happen here. Congress never passed a law saying the internet should be heavily regulated like a utility, nor did it pass one giving the FCC the authority to make that determination. The executive branch pressured the agency into claiming a power that remained and remains with the legislative branch. Fundamentally, I'd argue much of the fault lies with the judiciary's application of Chevron. The Supreme Court's decision in Chevron created a situation where the executive branch could engage in the type of pressure campaigns that we witnessed with Title II. That's because Chevron, at least as applied by some courts, has allowed agencies to seize big new powers without an express grant of authority from Congress. If a statute were ambiguous, Chevron held, an agency could go ahead and regulate. In cases of vast economic or political significance, at least, Chevron not only creates an environment in which agencies push the bounds of their authority, it creates an incentive for the executive branch or other political actors to pressure them into doing so. That's why the Supreme Court's recent decision in West Virginia versus EPA is so important. It makes clear that on matters of enormous significance, like the one before us today, administrative agencies must point to far more than an ambiguous statute to persuade a reviewing court that Congress authorized the agency to act. After all, as a constitutional matter, Congress doesn't operate like a sieve, just inadvertently spilling grants of massive authorities. After West Virginia, Congress's delegation of authority in these types of cases can no longer be implicit. It must be explicit. Properly applied, West Virginia will stop the flip-flopping and eliminate the incentives for the executive branch to engage in the type of pressure campaigns we've seen with Title II. It'll help improve administrative agency decision-making, too, by ensuring that we're driven by the facts, by the law, and by the record. It will allow the natural forces of compromise to work their will on legislating rather than winner-take-all party line votes at agencies. And it will ensure that the legislative power will remain with Congress unless and until the legislature decides to delegate them. If that weren't enough, today's order independently violates the Supreme Court's command in West Virginia through its unrestrained use of forbearance. Although the FCC may forbear from parts of Title II, the order indiscriminately applies that authority to fundamentally rewrite the 1996 Act by line item vetoing more than a dozen provisions central to Title II's legislative design. As multiple Supreme Court decisions confirm, that unrestrained application of forbearance is illegitimate. Indeed, just last year, the Supreme Court struck down the Biden administration's use of analogous waiver authority after the Education Department tried to use it to wipe away student debt. As a matter of statutory construction and implied delegation, the FCC is not presumed to have the sweeping power to refashion Title II into an entirely new legislative scheme by picking and choosing which parts to apply. The FCC's flip-flopping also informs how seriously one should take the order's policy arguments. The FCC tries to dress up its latest power grab in a 400-plus page order that offers a laundry list of bogus justifications. Few of them rely on actual evidence. Virtually none point to a real problem. All fall apart under casual scrutiny. And it's not even clear to me the FCC believes the reasons it offers today for Title II. Today's order is not about net neutrality. When we abandoned Title II in 2017, proponents of greater government control flooded the zone with apocalyptic rhetoric. Media outlets and politicians alike mindlessly parroted their claims. They predicted the end of the internet as we know it, and that you'll get the internet one word at a time. Consumers would have to pay for each website they wanted to reach. None of that happened. Americans were subjected to one of the greatest hoaxes in regulatory history. Nor is today's order about preventing internet gatekeepers from squashing innovation and free expression. Again, check the receipts. After 2017, it wasn't the ISPs that abused their positions in the internet ecosystem. It was not the ISPs that blocked links to the New York Post's Hunter Biden laptop story. Old Twitter did that. It wasn't the ISPs that just one day after lobbying this FCC on this order blocked all posts from a newspaper and removed links to the outlet after it published a critical article. Facebook did that. It wasn't the ISPs that earlier this month blocked links to a California-based news organization from showing up in search results to protest a state law. Google did that. And it wasn't the ISPs that blocked Beeper Mini, an app that enabled interoperability between iOS and Android messaging. Apple did that. Since 2017, we've learned that the real abusers of gatekeeper power were not ISPs operating at the physical layer, but big tech companies at the applications layer. Perversely, today's order makes big tech behemoths even stronger than before. And today's order is not about correcting a market failure. Broadband access is more vibrant and competitive than ever, no matter how you slice the reams of data. Americans benefited from lower prices, faster speeds, broader coverage, increased competition, and accelerated internet builds. In fact, here's what the data show. Internet speeds are up 430% since 2017 on the fixed broadband side. They're up 647% on the mobile side. The prices for internet services have dropped in real terms by about 9%. Now, if you look just on the mobile broadband side alone, real prices have dropped by roughly 18% since 2017. And for the most popular broadband speed tiers, real prices are down 54%, and for the fastest broadband speed tiers, they're down 55% over the last 8 years. The FCC realizes that the old justifications for Title II will no longer cut it. So, as if nothing ever happened, as if we just shake and Etch-a-Sketch, the old predictions were not just disproven, they've been abandoned. And the agency invents entirely new justifications. The FCC throws whatever it can think of against the wall to see if anything sticks. The order now claims Title II is necessary for national security, for public safety, for law enforcement, for robocall mitigation, for pole attachments, for accessibility, for privacy and cybersecurity. The list goes on and on. But the FCC's latest set of claims fares no better than those they trotted out in 2015. They're simply new pretexts to justify an old power grab. Take national security. The FCC has identified no gap in national security that Title II would fill. Rather, the record makes clear that Congress has already empowered agencies with national security expertise, including Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, Commerce, and Treasury, to address these issues in the communications sector. Indeed, the Biden administration's own filing in this proceeding confirms national security agencies already have and, quote, exercise substantial authorities with respect to the information and communications sectors. In particular, the Biden administration already has the authority to prohibit entities controlled by the CCP from operating in the U.S. today. Indeed, the Commerce Department codified one such set of authorities back in 2021. So Title II is not necessary to fill any gap in authority. Indeed, as to those specific CCP-aligned companies mentioned in the FCC's order, the FCC's own database of ISPs shows that they're not offering anything that would qualify as broadband service today, subject to Title II, even after reclassification. Or take consumer privacy. The FTC already regulates ISPs and their privacy practices. Indeed, at this very moment, broadband consumers benefit from the same set of federal privacy rules that protect consumers across the economy. But those federal rules go away with respect to broadband when the FCC votes here for Title II. That's because by law, the FCC loses 100% of its authority over any service that's regulated by the FCC under Title II. In turn, the FCC's Title II decision would leave broadband consumers with no federal privacy rules to protect them, because Congress prohibited the FCC from applying its own privacy rules, or any substantially similar ones, to ISPs back in 2017. While the FCC claims that there'd still be some residual Section 222 statutory privacy protections that could apply to ISPs, I think that assertion is dubious at best given the 2017 law. So far from filling a gap in consumer privacy rules, an FCC decision to apply Title II to broadband would create one. Or take cybersecurity. Once again, the agency makes no serious attempt to argue that Title II is necessary to promote cybersecurity. For one, Congress and executive branch agencies have already formulated a comprehensive cybersecurity regime that's solidly grounded in existing law. That effort is led not by the FCC, but by the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Nothing in Title II gives the FCC any additional authorities when it comes to participating in the federal government's CISA-led process. For another, Title II doesn't authorize the FCC to adopt national cybersecurity standards. Indeed, even under the FCC's reading, Title II doesn't apply to the vast range of cyber targets like cloud providers and tech platforms, further undermining any claim that Title II is necessary for cybersecurity. Or take network resiliency and outage reporting. Here, too, the FCC makes no coherent case for advancing Title II. For one, the FCC already collects outage reports, operational status, and restoration information from providers that offer broadband. For another, America's broadband networks are more robust and resilient than those in countries with far more heavy-handed or Title II-like regulatory regimes. And with respect to 911 in particular, the FCC already has specific rules in place today that address outage that impact public safety services. Or take public safety. The FCC rests this claim on a single event that, turns out, has nothing to do with Title II or net neutrality. In that 2018 incident, a fire department purchased a data-limited plan and experienced speed reductions after exceeding the limit. The ISP made an exception and lifted the reduction. Although the FCC constantly invokes this event, if you notice, the agency studiously avoids actually stating that this is the type of issue that would be prevented by Title II. Under today's order, it would remain lawful for multiple reasons. Now, misleading the people about what we're doing is one thing, but the order also leaves them worse off. Everything we love about the internet comes from investment. Our broadband networks are built on private capital. And those investment decisions in turn depend on a company's best guess of the long-term financial horizon. Will ISPs invest as intensely when the rules of the road are opaque, when business choices can be second-guessed without notice, when regulators reserve the right to dictate the rate of return, or when upgrades and innovations require more and more paperwork and approvals? Uncertainty riddles every aspect of this order. Will consumers pay new broadband taxes? Not today, but maybe tomorrow. Can ISPs offer customized plans for consumers with unique data, speed, or cost needs? Possibly, but it depends. What about intelligent networks to prevent congestion? Sure, but only if a handful of indeterminate factors are met. Does the FCC intend to issue new regulations? Definitely, but you'll have to wait and see what the agency does. By all indications, things will get worse before they get better. I guess that's the good news. Apart from this order, the Biden administration is on a spree of unchecked regulatory excess. At President Biden's urging, the FCC adopted a digital equity order last year that hands the administrative state veto power over essentially every decision about the provision of internet service in the country. Elsewhere, the FCC's laser focused on nullifying private contracts, micromanaging advertising, dictating rates, blindsiding companies by enforcing legal expectations that aren't on the books, and stepping into the swim lanes traditionally occupied by other federal agencies. The FCC either doesn't understand or doesn't care how this volatile and punitive climate of regulation will deter investment in broadband networks. This isn't just economic theory. Again, let's go to the tape. Broadband investments slowed down after the FCC imposed Title II in 2015. And it picked back up again after we restored Title I in 2017. Or look at Europe, where regulators have long applied centralized, utility-style regulations to their continent's internet infrastructure. While America's economy, digital economy, is the envy of the world, sluggish European networks suffer from chronic underinvestment. Without greater investment, the Biden administration's own broader policy objectives fall apart. The administration wants ISPs to opt into federal support programs like BEAD so they can bring broadband to high-cost, unserved communities. But who will take that financial risk when an ISP's returns can be wiped away with the stroke of a bureaucrat pen? The administration has pushed ISPs to deploy O-RAN technologies to offer additional competitive options beyond dominant Chinese vendors. But who will invest in O-RAN when its core functionalities, virtualization and network slicing, might violate an amorphous rule against impairing or degrading traffic? While misrepresenting Title II's benefits, the order takes an ostrich-like approach to its documented harms. It's a textbook example of arbitrary and capricious agency action to reach a predetermined outcome. In the end, and thankfully I'm coming to the end here, although you'll have to wait, there's a barn burner of multiple additional pages in the written dissent to follow, I remain optimistic. I'm confident that we will right the ship, and I'm certain that the courts will overturn this unlawful power grab. For now, though, I dissent, and my full written statement will follow. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Starks.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Today, we take the important and necessary step to give control of the internet back to those who deserve it. That is, namely, consumers. That is what today's item is really about, and some, no doubt, will claim that this is all a scheme for the government to control the internet. But let's be real. It is about ensuring that each and every American can use their broadband subscription to access the legal content of their choosing. It is about empowering consumers to control how they experience the internet while ensuring that their provider isn't impeding, blocking, favoring, or prioritizing certain content. It is about ensuring that broadband, the foundation for so many of our interactions each and every day, has real oversight. I'll say it again, today's item puts consumers in the driver's seat, not ISPs, not middlemen who can throw money around, consumers. Too often, the rhetoric around controversial proceedings is focused on extreme examples and worst-case scenarios. And so if we zoom in that way, we really overlook the individuals that our decisions are designed to impact. But not me, not today. Today, I think about people like Ron, a senior and a veteran who uses his broadband connection to contact the VA to set up appointments, check the status of his medications. He volunteers with the American Legion, and he shares his experience with post-traumatic stress disorder with his fellow veterans. Broadband gives him the opportunity to share his story with others near and far. It gives him the power to choose how to connect and with whom. Or consider Miss Anna, the leader of the Bethel Native Corporation. She graciously welcomed me into her home in Bethel, Alaska, with a bowl of moose chili last year. There are no major roads in Bethel. If you want to leave town, you do it in a boat or a plane. Yes, indeed. As we ate, Miss Anna told me about the exciting vision that she has shared with her community. New fiber deployments that would enable the community of 6,000, residents of even smaller villages along the Kuskokwim River, to secure the necessities of modern life without having to leave the place that they call home. Employment through remote work, healthcare with telehealth visits, better education for their kids, the benefits of a free and open internet. Or I've talked with Paul, who says that broadband access for him is like air. He uses his broadband connection to stay in contact with long-separated relatives in Greece, and he told me that they cry each time they connect online. That's a powerful connection. It's inherent in our shared humanity, the need to connect. And the ability to facilitate those connections is one of the reasons I'm proud today of all, to serve as a Federal Communications Commissioner. But more importantly, I firmly believe it guides our actions here today, empowering consumers, setting the proper guardrails for providers, recognizing that network security is national security, and securing our networks so that they can meet the moment when public safety requires. I'll briefly highlight the issue of national security in this item. Broadband is, of course, in our homes, offices, powering our devices and supporting our infrastructure, and its security is essential. And today's effort clarifies our authority to help make sure that our broadband networks are safe in light of constant attacks against them. And more importantly, that there is oversight here. The threats against our networks are real. The FCC has authority and investigatory tools that are unique among our federal government. NTIA's filing, I would commend to you in particular in the record, recognizes and supports the unique role the Commission plays in ensuring our national security as it relates to broadband within the whole of government approach, asserting that, quote, reclassifying BIS is necessary to ensure that the Commission has the authority it needs to advance national security objections, close quote, and that the reclassification will, quote, protect our networks from malicious actors by leveraging the appropriate tools at its disposal, including the relevant Title II provisions, close quote. Simply put, many of the safeguards necessary to protect the networks of our future will be out of reach without today's action. Across the nation, numerous ISPs and network operators are working hard to protect Americans against the onslaught and daily attacks against their networks, as I've repeatedly emphasized. We rightfully and unanimously revoked the International Section 214 authorizations of certain Chinese providers following recommendations from the executive branch. However, because of the repeal of the 2015 Open Internet rules, those revocations only prohibited those specific Chinese providers from offering common carrier service. Our national security action did not touch their BIAS offerings, meaning that providers already identified as posing an unacceptable national security risk and a law enforcement risk could still operate BIAS networks in the United States. As I predicted, even after we revoked China Telecom's International Section 214 authority, they continued to operate in the United States. Their own website currently shows that the company operates 26 points of presence in the United States, offers co-location, broadband, IP transit, and data center services. They are interconnecting with other networks and have access to important points of presence and data centers. As I have pointed out before, this is part of a larger problem and warrants a closer look. With reclassification, we can truly secure our networks from entities that pose very real threats. A few additional highlights. I want to thank the chairwoman for working with me, with my office, to improve this item. 3 points in particular that I'll quickly tick through. I will have a longer statement for the record. I got that out earlier than you did, Commissioner Carr. First, the order makes clear that this item is not an effort to regulate rates. Let me repeat, I do not support rate regulation. Some have gone so far as to argue that any program or effort to ensure that ISPs provide an affordable broadband option constitutes rate regulation. I strongly and fundamentally disagree. The Affordable Connectivity Program is not a rate regulation program, full stop, nor are similar efforts to ensure that broadband is within the reach of low-income households. That leads me to say that I would be remiss if I did not take 20 seconds to say that this is the time, now is the moment for us to find a permanent funding mechanism for ACP. I continue to push for the ACP Extension Act, but remain open to other solutions to create a permanent funding mechanism for the 48 million households that struggle to subscribe to broadband due to the issue of affordability. The second point that I want to highlight, I'm glad the item now clarifies that our efforts to properly target nefarious actors within our domestic broadband networks will not have negative unintended consequences for global data flows and international interconnection agreements. Last, I appreciate working with the chairwoman's office to clarify our throttling rule to ensure that we avoid loopholes in our net neutrality framework. Now, I previously committed to taking a close look at the record in light of developments in administrative law. Doing so has left me even more convinced that Congress empowered us to proceed. Title II opponents continue to cling to the 2017 order's view that virtually any service that connects users to information amounts to a Title I service. This utterly capacious interpretation would read via telecommunications right out of the Act's definition of an information service. Taken to its logical conclusion, it would lead to the deregulation of basically every communication service, including traditional voice telephony, and undoing Congress's will in enacting Title II. In case you missed it, the Supreme Court has otherwise cautioned agencies against adopting expansive, unbounded definitions that would, in effect, lead to a regulatory sea change from the status quo. And I would also note that, ironically, Title II opponents believe Congress could not have acted with the clarity required under the major questions doctrine because the term telecommunications service is ambiguous under Brand X. This just does not hold up. Whether or not that term is ambiguous, our authority to apply it to services like broadband is clear as day, and that is what I believe matters here. More importantly, before a court could even reach that issue, it would need to conclude that this is, in fact, a major questions case. But those cases are reserved for only extraordinary cases. And this, I believe, does not come close to that. There is no unheralded power that we're purporting just now to discover in the annals of an old, dusty statute. We've been classifying communications for decades, and the 1996 Act expressly codified our ability to continue that practice. And with respect to the classification of this service in particular, years of litigation up to including Supreme Court review has resulted in multiple court decisions recognizing clearly our authority. And so with respect to an open internet requirement, in particular network neutrality, became the FCC policy almost 20 years ago, including under a Republican administration. And the exact framework we adopt today has already been road tested on appeal. So no matter how you try to look at this, it's just not an agency pushing the limits. I'm thankful that today broadband is no longer without oversight. Consumers will benefit in the end. this proceeding has been no doubt a monumental undertaking. Thank you to the chair. Thank you to the very hard work by the team, by the Bureau. I strongly approve. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I dissent, and I will publish my statement. Thanks.
Appreciate that. Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. I might go a little longer. As of today, April 25, 2024, I have been a commissioner for 6 months. And in the past 7 months, I misspoke. In the past 7 months, I've had the privilege of meeting with stakeholders, industry, civil rights and public interest groups, and members of the public. I've met with advocates who support today's item, and I've met with advocates who don't. I've met with people across the country who emphasize just how necessary their broadband internet connection is to their everyday lives. I've heard from veterans and care providers that 80% of medical treatment for recovery requires a broadband connection. I've heard from parents, students, and teachers that a broadband connection is necessary to complete much of the homework assigned to students. I've heard from consumers the importance of a broadband connection to keeping in touch with friends and family, particularly to those who live abroad. I've received messages from parents who are concerned about losing their broadband connection and what that will do to their family and children's economic opportunity. I've heard from first responders that having a reliable broadband connection, especially in times of emergency, can save lives and speed up recovery efforts. So I will start with the thing that we all agree on. Broadband access to the internet is a critical conduit that is essential to modern life. We all agree. And as a nation, we have recognized the importance of connectivity and have made a historic multi-billion-dollar investment in broadband for all. Despite this unanimous agreement of the importance and value of this critical infrastructure and how it plays in our modern society, since 2017, there has not been a federal framework in place to protect and secure the integrity of the networks. We've had a patchwork of state net neutrality rules that have upheld the foundation, yet there's no expert agency ensuring at a national level that the internet is open and fair. Protecting this critical infrastructure that is essential to the safety, economy, health, education, and well-being of this country is good public policy. The value is so great that we cannot wait for the flood to arrive before we start to build a levee. That would leave us woefully behind in an increasingly digital world where this critical resource is constantly at play. That is why what we are doing here is so important. Today, we reinstate appropriate guardrails to ensure that this critical conduit remains accessible and secure for all. The rules we adopt today ensure that access to the internet remains open so that all viewpoints, including ones with which I disagree, are heard without discrimination. More so, these principles protect consumers while also maintaining a healthy, competitive broadband internet ecosystem, because we know that competition is required for access to a healthy, open internet that is accessible for all. Most importantly, I support today's item because it prioritizes consumers and gives the Commission more tools to close the digital divide. It ensures that consumers are in charge of what they do online and that they can be confident that when they send information over their broadband connection, it will not be blocked or altered by their provider. These protections are essential for all consumers, but especially for those communities that historically have been left on the wrong side of the digital divide. Thank you to the many advocates, stakeholders, and members of the public who provided feedback and participated in this proceeding. My staff and I met with over 45 parties and appreciated hearing all your feedback. The item that we adopt today is stronger because of these meetings. And thank you to the staff throughout the agency for their work on this item, and to the Wireline Competition Bureau for leading this effort. I will now share my remarks in Spanish. El acceso a Internet de banda ancha es una vía de comunicación de importancia fundamental, esencial para la vida moderna. Sin embargo, desde 2017, Esta infraestructura de importancia clave carece de un marco normativo federal destinado a garantizar que siga siendo accesible y segura para todos. De ahí que la acción adoptada acá sea tan relevante. Hoy restablecemos un conjunto de normas dirigidas a resguardar y garantizar para todos la continuidad de acceso a esta vía de comunicación de importancia fundamental. Quiero ser muy clara sobre la acción que hoy tomamos. Estamos restableciendo reglas comparables a barreras de seguridad para salvaguardar y asegurar la infraestructura de banda ancha, para proteger a los consumidores y para garantizar que la Internet permanezca abierta y disponible para todos los proveedores y consumidores de contenido. Las reglas de neutralidad de la red cibernética garantizan la continuidad del amplio acceso a Internet, de modo que todos los puntos de vista, incluidos aquellos con los que no concuerdo, sean escuchados sin discriminación. Estas normas son importantes porque dan prioridad a los consumidores. Estamos restableciendo reglas que impiden el bloqueo, la restricción del flujo de datos y la prioridad por pago. Estas normas garantizarán que sean los consumidores quienes estén a cargo de su propia actividad en la red. Estas protecciones son esenciales para todos los consumidores, especialmente para aquellas comunidades que históricamente se han visto afectadas por la brecha digital. Now, Madam Chairwoman, I cede the remainder of my 33 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you, commissioners. 4 years ago, the pandemic changed life as we know it. We were told to stay home, hunker down, and live online. So much of work, school, and healthcare migrated to the internet. If we wanted to engage with the world, we needed to do it all through a broadband connection. It became clear that no matter who you are or where you live, you need broadband to have a fair shot at digital age success. It went from nice to have to need to have for everyone, everywhere. Broadband is now an essential service. Essential services, the ones we count on in every aspect of modern life, have some basic oversight. So let's be clear about what we are doing today. This agency, the nation's leading communications authority, believes every consumer deserves internet access that is fast, open, and fair. That is why we determined that the Federal Communications Commission should be able to assist consumers and take action when it comes to the most important communications of our time, and that's broadband. This is common sense. But in a world where up is down and down is up, the last FCC threw this authority away and decided broadband needed no supervision. As a result, it tossed out net neutrality policies grounded in Title II of the Communications Act that have deep origins in communications law and history. These net neutrality policies ensured you can go where you want and do what you want online without your broadband provider making choices for you. They make clear your broadband provider should not have the right to block websites, slow services, or censor online content. These policies were court-tested and approved. They were wildly popular. In fact, studies show that 80% of the public support the FCC's net neutrality policies and opposed their repeal. Now for a plot twist. After the last FCC took away these policies, despite this broad public outcry, a curious thing happened. When Washington stepped out, California rode in with its own open internet regime. Other states, too. All in all, nearly a dozen put net neutrality rules into state law, executive orders, and contracting policies. So in effect, we have net neutrality policies that providers are abiding by right now across this country. They're just coming from Sacramento and places like it. I think in a modern digital economy, we should have a national net neutrality policy and make clear the nation's expert on communications has the ability to act when it comes to broadband. This is good for consumers, good for public safety, and good for national security. And that is why we are taking this action under Title II of the Communications Act today. So let's start with consumers. They spoke out in droves when this agency repealed net neutrality. They jammed our inboxes, overwhelmed our online comment system, and clogged our phone lines. They clamored to get net neutrality back. In the intervening years, they have not stopped. Thousands of consumers write us month after month seeking to have this agency help them navigate issues with their broadband service. Yet as a result of the last FCC throwing these policies out and backing away from broadband, we can only take action when they have issues with their long-distance voice service. There is nothing modern about that. Consumers have made clear to us they do not want their broadband provider cutting sweetheart deals with fast lanes for some services and slow lanes for others. They do not want their providers engaging in blocking, throttling, or paid prioritization. And if they have problems, well, they expect the nation's expert authority on communications to be able to respond. Because we put net neutrality rules back on the national books, we fix that today. Let's talk about public safety. When there is a network outage, all eyes turn to the FCC. But because the last FCC backed away from basic broadband oversight, the agency has only been able to gather outage data when long-distance voice service fails, but it cannot do the same for broadband. In a modern digital economy, it's crazy that we cannot collect mandatory data about broadband outages, because it makes it harder to identify patterns of internet failure, fix them when they occur, and put in place policies to make sure our networks are more resilient across the board. The importance of public safety and broadband was driven home to me earlier this month when I visited the Santa Clara County Fire Department. Dressed in uniform, the firefighters told me how when they were responding to an emergency, they discovered that the internet connection in one of their command vehicles was being throttled, compromising their ability to keep connected and fight fires. They want net neutrality rules back, and they could not fathom that the last FCC gave up the ability to even investigate what happened, let alone help them or any other consumer having problems with their broadband connection. They're right, and we fix it today. Let's talk about national security. While this agency has taken a series of actions to reduce our dependence on insecure telecommunications equipment to keep potentially hostile actors from connecting to our networks, it's not enough to keep our adversaries at bay. There are vulnerabilities in our broadband networks, and our ability to do something about them was sidelined by the last FCC withdrawing from the arena. Take service authorization. Under Title II of the Communications Act, the FCC grants carriers the right to provide communications in the United States. It also has the power to take away that right. We did this during the last several years when we stripped state-affiliated companies from China of their authority to operate in this country. But it is important to understand that our actions did not extend to broadband thanks to the work of the last FCC. So in essence, we took away the right of CCP-affiliated providers to offer long-distance voice service in the United States. But broadband, we lacked the authority to stop that. This is not a modern approach to national security and service authorization. We need to fix it. Take cybersecurity. Our national security authorities are on record detailing how state-affiliated Chinese carriers and others have exploited insecure internet routing protocols to hijack internet traffic. When we were asked to do something about it, thanks to the last FCC stepping out of the broadband fray, the best we could offer was a forum here in the commission meeting room. I don't think that deters our adversaries. We need to fix this. Take security issues with data centers. When the FCC chose to leave broadband outside of its purview, it left interconnection rights without any basic oversight. That means the agency has nothing to say about broadband providers in the United States interconnecting with data centers controlled by CCP-affiliated companies. Again, this needs a fix. Finally, let me say a few words about what we don't do today. This is not about rate regulation, no how, no way. and we will not undermine incentives to invest in networks. In fact, broadband investment was higher when net neutrality rules were in place than after they were repealed. How about that? The action we take here is good for consumers, public safety, national security, and network investment. It's also good for privacy because Title II of the Communications Act does not let your voice provider sell your location data, among other sensitive information. Your broadband provider shouldn't be able to do this either. To anyone or any new artificial intelligence model looking for a payday from your data without your permission. In our post-pandemic world, we know that broadband is a necessity and not a luxury. We know that it is an essential service. And when a consumer has a problem with it, they should be able to reach out to the nation's expert on communications and get the help they need. They should be able to count on a national net neutrality policy that is grounded in the law and history of the United States. That is why we take this action today to help ensure that broadband is fast, open, and fair for all of us. And a proceeding this important and complex requires a big team, so let me thank Hannah Andre, Eric Beeth, Michelle Burlove, David Brodian, Emily Kaditz, Adam Copeland, Megan Danner, CJ Ferraro, Jesse Goodwin, Janice Gorin, Jody Griffin, Travis Hahn, Trent Harkrader, Heather Hendrickson, Allison Howell, Melissa Kirkle, Greg Kwan, Jesse Jackman, Chris Jimenez, Alex Johns, Dennis Johnson, Chris Laughlin, Jonathan Lecter, Sam Lewis, Rhonda Lean, Michaela Mastriani, Aurel Mathieu, Jody May, Jamie McCoy, Terry Natoli, Kiara Ortiz, Nick Page, Mike Ray, Jordan Reth, Zach Ross, Mason Sheffa, Randall Seifers, Simon Soleimani, John Viklowski, Mary Wolf, and David Zeisiger from the Wireline Competition Bureau. Jerusha Burnett, Diane Burstein, Zach Champ, Aaron Garza, Josh Mendelson, Wes Platt, Susie Rosen Singleton, Mika Savir, Michael Scott, and Mark Stone from the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau. Jeffrey Brown, Jolena Kursman, Hunter Deely, Anthony DeLaurentis, Kate DePriest, Loyani Gall, Georgina Feigen, Pamela Gallant, Lisa Griffin, Alice Joe, Kylun Lee, Ryan McDonald, Rosemary McHenry, Patrick McGrath, Keith Morgan, Victoria Randazzo, Ken Scheibel, Adam Soaps, and Amr Zain from the Enforcement Bureau. Brendan Murray and Raylan Remy from the Media Bureau, Johannes Bauer, Paul LaFontaine, Kate Matraves, Julia McHenry, Ginny Metallo, Eric Ralph, Michelle Schaefer, Don Stockdale, and Alex Yankovich from the Office of Economics and Analytics, Joy Ragsdale and Jocelyn James from the Office of Communications Business Opportunities, Denise Coca, Kate Collins, Francis Gutierrez, Gabrielle Kim, David Kretsch, Ethan Lucarelli, Tom Sullivan, and Savante Swider from the Office of International Affairs, Melina Barzilai, Sarah Citron, Michelle Ellison, Michael Jansen, Doug Klein, Jake Lewis, Rick Mallon, Marcus Mayer, Scott Novak, Eric Olson, Joel Rabinowitz, Roy Sherlock, Anjali Singh, Jeffrey Steinberg, Elliot Tarloff, and Shin Yu from the Office of General Counsel, Ken Carlberg, Rebecca Clinton, Michael Connolly, Greg Helligen, Deborah Jordan, Nikki McGinnis, Austin Randazzo, Jim Schlichting, Chris Smeek, and James Wiley from the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau, and Stephanie Asus, Garnet Hanley, Thomas Hastings, Susanna Larson, Grant Lucas, Paul Malmut, Roger Noel, Justin Park, Haley Preacher, Jessica Quinley, Peter Ratched, Linda Ray, Jennifer Salhus, John Schaubel, Blaze Cinto, Nadia Sotis Wallace, Joel Tavenblatt, Ty Tran, and Matthew Warner from the Wireless Telecommunications Bureau. They are broadband champions, all of them. And with that, we're going to take a vote on the item. Commissioner Carr.
Dissent.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Dissent.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
And the chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges as requested. Madam Secretary, can you announce the next item on today's agenda?
Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners, items 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 on your agenda are enforcement actions and will be presented by the Enforcement Bureau. Liana Gal, Chief of the Bureau, will give the introduction.
All right, Enforcement Bureau, you got to follow that. Thank you, Madam Secretary. Because these items are enforcement actions, we are going to switch the order up just a bit, as the Commission has done in the past, in past cases that involve similar presentations at an open meeting. As with all open meeting items, the Bureau circulated these to every commissioner's office at least 3 weeks ago. But there is a long-standing practice at the agency that we do not publicly disclose parties of enforcement matters unless and until the Commission decides to take action. For these types of items, that means the agency formally votes on the item, then here's a brief presentation from the Bureau before proceeding to any statements that commissioners may have. This process ensures that these sensitive matters will not be publicly disclosed until the FCC has voted to take action, and we're going to follow that precedent here. So we will now proceed to a vote on these enforcement actions. We will start with item 3. Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. On item 4, Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. On item 5, Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. On item 6, Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. On item 7, Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. All right, last one. On item 8, Commissioner Carr.
Approve.
Commissioner Starks.
Approve.
Commissioner Symington.
Approve.
Commissioner Gomez.
Approve.
The chair votes aye. The item is adopted with editorial privileges if requested. Please proceed to our Enforcement Bureau Chief.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. We appreciate the opportunity to present consensus for the Commission. Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Thank you for your consideration and your votes today on these 6 enforcement items. Notices of apparent liability for forfeiture or NALs against Jean-Maurice, Ronald David, Joao Vieira, Robert Bellinger, Giovanni Pierre, and Mario Turner, and Shane Kelly for engaging in pirate radio broadcasting in apparent violation of Section 511 of the Communications Act. The 2020 Preventing Illegal Radio Abuse Through Enforcement Act, or Pirate Act, codified as Section 511 of the Communications Act, requires the Commission to perform yearly pirate sweeps in the top 5 pirate radio markets. The 6 NALs for your consideration today stem from the first pirate sweep in the Boston market. They underscore the Commission's continuing commitment for curtailing pirate radio broadcasting. With me at the table are Jeremy Marcus, Deputy Bureau Chief, David Marks, Chief Counsel in the Office of the Field Director, and Andrew Leha, Field Counsel in the Office of the Field Director. Andrew will now present these items.
Thank you, Loyan. Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. Unlicensed radio stations, also known as pirate radio stations, operate illegally. They undermine the Commission's efforts to manage limited radio spectrum and pose a danger to the public by interfering with licensed stations that inform their listeners of important public safety messages. These messages include emergency alert system transmissions, providing vital information regarding weather events and other public hazards. Accordingly, Commission enforcement action in this area is essential. The first item involves Jean Marius, operator of the pirate radio station Radio Teleplanet Compass in Brockton, Randolph, and Mattapan, Massachusetts. Marius is a longtime pirate radio operator who was issued a $10,000 forfeiture in 2006 that remains unpaid. He was also issued 2 notices of unlicensed operation in 2017, notifying him that his actions violated the Communications Act and were to be immediately halted. As part of the Boston Pirate Radio sweep, agents located Marius' station operating without authorization and in apparent violation of the Pirate Act on 4 dates in June and July 2023. The transmissions were on 2 separate frequencies and traced to 3 different locations. On one of those dates, Marius operated from 2 different locations on 2 separate frequencies. Given this widespread pirate radio operation, as well as Marius' history of pirate radio operations, his disregard for Commission authority, an unpaid forfeiture, and repeated unheeded warnings by the Commission, the NAL proposes a penalty of $597,775 against Jean Marius. The second item involves Renaud David, operator of Lotnevo Radio, a pirate radio station in Brockton, Massachusetts. During the Boston Pirate Radio sweep, agents documented the station operating in the Brockton area without authorization 4 times between June and December 2023, and found information on the station's social media pages linking David to the station. In July 2023, David admitted to agents that he owned and operated Lotnevo Radio and agreed to immediately halt broadcasting. During follow-up investigations, however, agents twice found that the station was still operating from the same location without authorization. Given David's disregard for commission authority and his continued operation of a pirate station months after agreeing to halt broadcasting, the NAL proposes a penalty of $120,000 against Renaud David. The third item involves Joao Vieira, operator of the pirate radio station Brockton FM in Brockton, Massachusetts. Agents located the station operating without authorization on 2 occasions in June and July 2023. Vieira admitted to agents that he was Brockton FM's operator, and he is listed as its director on the station's website. The NAL proposes a penalty of $40,000 against Joao Vieira. The fourth item involves Robert Bellinger, operator of a pirate radio station known as TBR Radio in Cotuit, Massachusetts. Agents located the station operating on 2 occasions in June and July of 2023. During an on-site inspection, Bellinger admitted to agents that he was the station operator, and social media postings support that admission. The NAL proposes a penalty of $40,000 against Robert Bellinger. The fifth item involves Giovanni Pierre and Mario Turner, joint operators of the pirate radio station known as Radio Telebrockton 96.5, or Brockton Heat, in Brockton, Massachusetts. Agents located the station operating on 2 occasions in June and July of 2023. Information found on the station's social media pages linked both Pierre and Turner to the pirate operations. The NAL proposes a joint and several penalty of $40,000 against Giovanni Pierre and Mario Turner. The sixth and final item involves Shane Kelly, operator of the pirate radio station The Test, 87.9 FM in Hyannis, Massachusetts. Agents located the station operating without authorization on June 6, 2023, as part of the Boston Pirate Radio sweep. During an on-site inspection, Kelly admitted to agents that he was the station's operator. The NAL proposes a penalty of $20,000 against Shane Kelly. The Enforcement Bureau appreciates the Commission's adoption of these 6 items and requests the grant of editorial privileges. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now hear any comments from the bench. Commissioner Carr.
Thank you so much to the team for all your diligent work on this. I really appreciate it. It's an important set of issues, and it takes a lot of work behind the scenes to get where we are right now, so thanks so much.
Commissioner Starks.
Yes, thank you. You know the Enforcement Bureau is my favorite. But for those of you keeping track at home, these are enforcement items. We've done New York, Miami, Philadelphia, and now Boston. So keep up the great work. And I think I've said it before, if you're in the pirate radio business, you know, the Enforcement Bureau is going to put you out of business. So thank you.
Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Boston. That's quite a large quadrilateral. I really appreciate the extensive field work that it took to perform these investigations, bring these cases, and congrats.
The geometry continues. Commissioner Gomez.
Thank you. The FCC has a responsibility to safeguard our nation's airwaves, ensuring that they are used for the public's benefit, and pirate radio stations pose a threat to this objective. So I'm pleased that the Commission continues to hold private radio operators accountable for their actions. So I want to thank the Enforcement Bureau staff for your hard work.
Thank you, Commissioners. For 9 decades, the FCC has been our nation's watchdog when it comes to the use of the public airwaves, and we take this responsibility seriously. It means that this resource is broadly available for all kinds of radio and wire activities, provided those who use our airwaves comply with our rules. When users fail to do so and cause harmful interference to others, we take action. That is exactly what we do today with these fines proposed against unauthorized radio operators in Massachusetts. I want to thank the agents and the field regional management folks, both in our New York and Boston field office, for their work on this effort under the Pirate Act. These agents are unsung heroes who help us manage our airwaves, and for their security, we're not going to mention who they are here today, but we really want them to know we're grateful for their service. I will mention, however, those who took up the charge that they sent our way in Washington, so thank you to Loyani Gall, Jeremy Marcus, Matthew Gibson, Ryan McDonald, Michael Rhodes, David Marks, Robert Keller, Andrew Leha, and Reggie Brashears from the Enforcement Bureau, and William Dever and Dave Konskow from the Office of General Counsel. And with that, would any of my colleagues like to make any announcements at this time? Commissioner Carr. Commissioner Starks.
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I'd like to announce some staff changes in the Starks office. Many of you know that my legal advisor for wireless space and international issues, Shiva Goyal, wrapped up his time at the Commission last week. He has moved on to join NTIA in service as the Senior Spectrum Advisor and Director of National Spectrum Strategy. So let me break that up. He is truly a superb lawyer and somebody who's a consummate legal advisor, a deep thinker, a creative thinker, threw himself into the work for me, for the office, but also somebody who I traveled to Dubai with, as many wireless advisors do, and they get assigned the international travel. He traveled with me to Sweden, and other places, and just truly a joy to be with him. I wish him and his family all of the best. I am glad that he's continuing to bring his immense talents to public service. And the American people will continue to benefit from him as a spectrum advisor for the American public in many ways now. But that has given me the opportunity to welcome Neshe Gindelsberger, who many of you know, everybody knows Neshe, to my team as acting legal advisor for wireless space international issues. She is joining from the Office of International Affairs, where she is the deputy chief. But truly, she is well known for her deep and vast and wide service here at the FCC, in addition to being a legal advisor to Commissioner Clyburn, Senior Deputy Chief of Wireless, and I have already benefited from her deep and extensive knowledge. So please welcome Neshe to my team. Thanks, Neshe. Oh, I'm sorry. I also have my interns to thank. Really quickly, sorry. It's a day to go on here, I think. In my current class of interns, as folks know, I really do deeply value interns. I think it's part of what I love as a commissioner, which is helping to train and see the next class as they bring their immense skills. So that is Roy Ah, Jasmine Held Hernandez, Carrie Hoffelt, Jesse Frankel. I am thankful for each of you and for your hard work over the semester, and always rooting you on for what comes next for each of you. Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Symington.
Thank you. I also do have one personnel announcement. My longtime wireline security advisor, Marco Peraza, has left my team as of Monday in order to join Commissioner Ferguson's staff at the FTC. I was worried that there might be a potential FCC-FTC non-compete, but he assured me it wouldn't be a problem. So thanks very much.
Well done. Commissioner Gomez. All right. Thank you, Commissioners. Before we adjourn, I just have two quick announcements, and they're both involved retirements. Daryl Cooper retired last month after 27 years of federal service. 27. Now, before joining the FCC, Daryl clerked at the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit, and he was also a director of Excited Home and Practice Law in Washington, D.C. And after he joined the agency, he served in the Cable Services Bureau, the Wireline Competition Bureau, the Public Safety and Homeland Security, and the Enforcement Bureau. But for the last 10 years, he made his home in the Consumer and Governmental Affairs Bureau, and specifically the Disabilities Rights Office. And during this time, Daryl worked on the requirements of the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act, and he helped coordinate the biennial reports to Congress that are required under that law. He's also served as a subject matter expert for hearing aid compatibility issues and has coordinated with so many other bureaus on issues of disability rights and assistance. So we want to thank Daryl for his years of service and his work to increase the accessibility of communications for all people in this country. We are also announcing the retirement of Pamela Smith, who is a veteran litigator in the Office of General Counsel, and she has nearly 30 years of service, 28 of them with the FCC. She joined the Office of General Counsel in 1996 from the Department of Justice, where she worked in the Environmental and Natural Resources Division after she had an earlier stint in private practice. During her time at the agency, Pam has seen it all, and she has brought her legendary attention to detail to bear in a whole wide range of commission orders on the courts of appeals, things involving spectrum auctions, telephone numbering, and regulatory fee cases, to a whole bunch of radio and television licensing matters. All right, this is the most fun fact because I didn't know it. Pam is married to Brad Berry, who recently finished leading the team that worked on the Commission's digital discrimination order. That's a powerhouse couple, just so you know. We are grateful for her 30 years of dedicated public service, and we wish Pam the very best in a well-deserved retirement. And with that, Madam Secretary, will you please announce the next date for the Commission's monthly agenda meeting?
The next agenda meeting of the Federal Communications Commission is Thursday, May 23rd, 2024.
Until then, we stand adjourned. Well done. Good job. Yeah.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everyone. If folks could please take any of their conversations to the lobby, we greatly appreciate it. We're about to get started with the Chairwoman's post-open meeting press conference. And as you know, we had a pretty lively and lengthy meeting. So I would like to give the Chairwoman as much time as possible to answer questions from reporters in the room. So with that, I welcome Chairwoman Rosenworcel to the podium.
Thank you. Okay. Good afternoon. All right, let's start. Why don't we start with David?
Hey, thank you for doing this. I wanted to ask specifically about the order's effect on the Chinese carriers, the ones that you invoked, that don't have the Section 214 authorizations. Can you speak to...
Could you please turn on your microphone?
She turned the red button.
Can you speak to the current state of broadband services being provided by Chinese carriers and what you anticipate once the 60-day clock expires, what that's going to look like?
First things first, under Section 214 of the Communications Act, the FCC authorizes the provision of communications in the United States. We also have the authority to take away the authorization for providing service. And as you know, during the last several years, we took away that authorization from several Chinese carriers. During that term, however, as a result of the past FCC's decision-making, this agency had no authority over broadband under Title II of the Communications Act. As a result, when we took away the authority from those Chinese companies, we were not taking away their authority to provide broadband in this country. We have evidence that they are doing so, including indication on their websites where they offer service. And we will take those matters and make sure that we investigate them going forward.
Hi, Madam Chairwoman. Just wanted to ask about the universal service contribution issue. In the draft order, it talks about legislative developments possibly taking place. I'm wondering what your confidence is that that's going to happen in the climate that Congress is in.
As you know, in the decision we made today, we forbeared from certain provisions in the law, including provisions involving universal service assessment. That's the identical approach to the one that was taken in the 2015 decision. We recognize that Congress is having a big and bipartisan discussion about the future of universal service and commend Senator Lujan and Senator Thune for leading that discussion in the Senate. I know there are comparable discussions going on in the House. As someone who's been doing this for quite some time, I think these discussions are more detailed and more expansive than anything I've seen before, so I'm optimistic that they are going to reach some resolution.
Thank you, Chair. When you announced the vote on today's net neutrality rules, you signaled that there could be further privacy measures, potentially about location data, and you mentioned location data again today. Can you talk about your plans about that and how to regulate that?
I think you know that there are outstanding enforcement actions involving our nation's wireless carriers taking location data from their consumers and selling it to third parties. We're looking to resolve those outstanding enforcement actions, and that is the first and next step.
Thank you. Following up on the cybersecurity section of the order, which affects those Chinese carriers, but also other elements of the order that cover more authority to do with network outage reporting, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
With the adoption of the order, once it goes into the Federal Register, does the Commission have the authority to fill those gaps immediately, or will it require more further rulemakings or other processes that might take more time to address those issues?
We are generally bound by the Administrative Procedures Act, and so we will have to engage in some additional rulemakings. But I think it is important that there is some basic oversight of broadband for things like you mentioned, being able to actually determine what outages have occurred, where they've occurred, and how we fix them.
Thanks, Madam Chairwoman. Could you help clarify where the thinking is now about what kind of data services are going to be considered exempt from net neutrality, especially for 5G? It sounds like operators are especially interested in next generation video games, counting as non-BIAS.
Yeah, so let's be clear about what broadband internet access service, or BIAS, is. That is a product designed for consumers that allows a consumer to reach substantially all points on the internet, which is a technocratic way of saying, yeah, that's your home basic broadband that we all rely on every day. It is vitally important to us that that service is available without fast lanes and slow lanes, and that you can go where you want and do what you want online without your broadband provider making decisions for you. We recognize that there are new technologies out there like network slicing, and for non-biased services, we know that carriers can explore them. There are a lot of different business opportunities to provide specific services in the future, and I think in the enterprise market there'll be a lot of opportunity to continue to explore them, because those are not biased services.
Hi, Madam Chairwoman. So I have two questions about this. The first, on the net neutrality order. The first is, how concerned, if at all, are you about anticipated challenges in the courts to this order? What is your thought process going into those potential challenges? And then also a follow-up on USF contribution reform. I know some groups have asked the Commission and staff in meetings leading up to today's vote to issue a further notice of proposed rulemaking, or even a notice of inquiry to just seek comment on what potential reform would look like. I'm wondering why that wasn't included in today's item, and if that's something that you're considering separately.
The rules we adopted today are court-tested and court-approved. They are very consistent with the rules that were adopted in 2015, which were upheld by the D.C. Circuit in 2016. I'm confident that these rules will also be upheld. And we will look at universal service reform issues going forward. But again, the steps we took today are identical to the ones we took in 2015. And on a going forward basis, it's vitally important to me that our universal service system does not disproportionately put the burden of support on the average consumer household.
Madam Chair, thank you much for taking questions. On the 988 item, you talked about the need for balancing of privacy as a consideration in this. Does that mean that from a policy standpoint, you don't see the FCC pursuing geolocation of 988 calls? Is that a step too far? Where do you see geolocation fitting in, if at all, as a 988 requirement?
You know, our work in this area is really governed by the relationships that we've built with Department of Health and Human Services and experts on mental health who point out to us there are best practices associated with mental health and locating someone in crisis, and also a variety of state laws that may restrict our ability to do so. So what we are doing right now with the consensus of the mental health community is putting forward a proposal for georouting, which would lead to information being relayed about the wireless cell tower that's being used, which is different than someone's precise location. And I think that going forward, we're going to continue to be guided by the mental health experts who understand these laws and best practices better than we do, and that's what got us to this point today. Mike?
To see the industry do in the transition to help those 23 million households who have been getting service through the program are now potentially going to face significantly higher bills under those programs?
I'm very proud of the work this agency did. As you mentioned, we've got 23 million households nationwide that rely on the Affordable Connectivity Program. It is the largest broadband affordability effort in our nation's history. We have broad-based and bipartisan support for the effort to continue to fund it in Congress and across the country. And I'm continuing to make clear to Congress that we have got to continue to fund this program. It's absolutely vital. And I know that conversations are ongoing with some of the major providers about what will happen if this program falls short and Congress does not continue to fund it. But I think the most important thing is to continue to impress upon Congress just how important this program is so they continue to fund it. All right. Thank you.
Another question?
All right, sure.
Awesome. Standard General has sued the FCC claiming that you blocked the Standard Tegna deal on the direction or the advice of Byron Allen. Did you?
I've shared this filing with the Office of General Counsel. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. With that, I welcome my colleague, Will Wyquist, who will be leading the Bureau press conference. Will, podium's yours.
Thank you, Paloma. So we'll take questions on the meeting items adopted today. Do you have any questions on the 988 geolocation item? Okay. Matt, you want to go first?
Thanks for taking the question. Any notable changes from the draft item? Any questions added? Anything significant from the draft to the item approved today?
So I'd characterize nothing significant. We incorporated new data for the statistics that was a little fresher from when we circulated. We received a letter from the community that we also made reference to, and then there was also the typical ex partes, but nothing material that changed.
Anything else on this item? Okay. Any questions on net neutrality?
I have several questions for you.
Okay.
So I will start with first, if you could talk about any changes to the draft, including parts on non-bias services and national security in that part of the draft.
Okay. So there were as you could imagine, there was a vibrant record. A lot of the changes in the draft are clarifications or responses to the ex partes that came in, but the underlying policy cuts are all the same, with the exception of there was an additional forbearance, a temporary forbearance that was put in at Commissioner Gomez's suggestion. With respect to, what was the first example? Okay, so there was a clarification around the non-biased data services that you'll see when the item comes out. And anything on national security, any clarifications in there? No. And we're going to try to get that item out as quickly as we can. It is a big item. There are statements that we're going to have to integrate from the commissioners, and they've all committed to saying to us that those are very long statements. So we'll get that out as soon as we can.
Is there any enforcement exemption in the finalized item for small providers? How is that addressed?
The enforcement scheme remains the same.
No changes from the draft? Not on enforcement. Okay, thank you.
Could you talk about, Commissioner Starks mentioned something about changes regarding the throttling rule were added that he sought. Could you talk a little bit about that?
You want this one?
Sure.
Yeah.
There, in response to some of the ex parte activity and the Stark's office, we made an additional clarification with respect to throttling that changed the language to make it clear that speeding up indiscriminately of content would also be in violation of the throttling rule.
To follow up on what you just said about, is that, sorry, a difference from the 2015 language about speeding up also being a violation, or is it the same as it was in 2015?
I don't know if I really want to characterize it one way or another in relation to 2015. The language of the 2015, the language of the throttling rule remains the same. The guidance that we provide in the item is probably worded a little bit differently, but I don't really want to read into the intent of the 2015 item versus our item. But our item is explicit in saying that speeding up of content would be analyzed under the throttling rule.
And does that ban these 5G fast lanes then, or is that something different?
So the 5G fast lane discussion in the record has come up around the concept of network slicing, and the Commission's discussion of network slicing remains the same from when the draft was released publicly, in the sense that the rules, we will continue to monitor network slicing and the evolution of that technology. Our rules do not prohibit the use of network slicing. If internet service providers are using slices to provide a bias or a bias-like service over a slice, then our rules will apply to that. If they're using bias to provide, as the chairman was saying, an enterprise-type service or non-biased data service, then our rules would not apply to that unless it is clear that they are attempting to evade our rules by characterizing the service differently.
So just to make sure I understand, so for the general consumer internet, fast lanes are not allowed, but for specialized enterprise services, they can have 5G fast lanes?
Could you repeat the question?
So for the general consumer internet, fast lanes are not allowed, whether it's a mobile or fiber optic connection?
So, I mean, the concept of a fast lane is not necessarily a commission-endorsed term. Again, with respect to throttling, we do make clear that speeding up of that content of a consumer-facing mass market service, as the chairman was referring to it, is not permitted. If that is done within a 5G network slice, we would have to evaluate the service to determine what the underlying service in that slice looks like.
So I asked Chairwoman Rosenworcel about USF contribution reform as part of this proceeding. So I'd like to pose the question to you as well. I know that many groups have, both outside meetings with the FCC and in meetings with you folks, have asked for some kind of proceeding, NPRM, even NOI, to look at contribution reform with the inclusion of bias. So could you talk a little bit about the decision to not include that in this particular item today, and kind of what the thinking is down the line, at least in the Wireline Bureau, about looking at this issue?
Sure. I don't want to talk about the decisions that we made, to put things into this item or take things out of this item. But what I will say is contributions reform is something that has been on the burner in this industry for a long time. It is a very complicated and challenging undertaking for us. And to simply throw it into this item in a further notice with a couple of weeks just isn't feasible. We know that there is a lot of work going on in Congress right now. As you heard the chairwoman talk about, there's bipartisan, bicameral groups actively talking about overall universal service reform that would necessarily touch on contributions. We owe them some space on that, and We will continue to run our universal service programs to the best way that we can.
So this item gives Section 254 forbearance to providers. Has the FCC ever reversed a forbearance before? So if biased providers were going to ever be included in the contribution base, presumably you would have to reverse that forbearance. So what is that process like? Has it been done?
It has been done before with respect to broadband data services, business data services, a number of years ago. But I'd have to come back to you and let you know when that is.
Okay. And I do have one last question
Sure.
on this item.
Shoot.
So preemption on a case-by-case basis, when you think about states, local governments that have their own net neutrality frameworks that might go further than what the FCC has in this item, I mean, is this considered a floor, not a ceiling? If a state or local government wants to go further than the protections laid out in this item, what is the FCC's approach to addressing that?
Again, the item does not use floor ceiling type language. I mean, we know that was kind of how the record was characterized. It really does adhere to the case by case evaluation consistent with what we did in 2015. So if that enables parties who are concerned about a particular law to come to us and seek a preemption decision, but we're not prejudging any particular state or local regime.
Any other questions on this item? Okay, thank you, guys.
Thank you guys very much.
Are there any questions on the enforcement items today? No? Okay, great, thank you. With that, I will hand it off to Commissioner Carr. Thank you very much.
Thanks, all. Good to see you. At the outset, just wanted to re-express my appreciation and thanks to Congress and to the President for signing into law the ban that definitively addresses TikTok's national security threats by requiring it to divest, to break its ties with the CCP. This has been an important issue over the last couple of years in particular. I think this shows that the U.S. government can, in fact, come together and solve something that's in the technology space that presents a real national security threat. In my view, I think the CCP made a bet that America would not have the resolve or the capacity to address this issue. And so I'm really glad to see that one get across the finish line. As for today's order, I said a lot already, so happy to sort of more quickly move into your questions, other than to say I think the major questions doctrine here is clear. It's fundamentally different from an administrative law perspective in terms of the review that the court will bring to this than any other prior iteration of this debate, and I'm very confident that ultimately the courts are going to turn this aside. But happy to start out.
Commissioner, thank you much for taking the time. You had indicated in your statement that you expected that this would be overturned at the judicial level.
I did. I said it again just now, too. Twice now.
Do you have any thoughts, any knowledge as to who is going to be plaintiff on this, and do you have any sense as to how soon something might be filed? Are we talking, you're expecting something as soon as next week, longer? What's your inside skinny on that?
No inside knowledge on sort of litigation strategy or who might be sort of taking an appeal from that perspective. Obviously, I think as the Bureau team indicated, there'll be some time to get the actual document out. They're going to move quickly, they say. And then there's obviously sort of publication in the Federal Register, and usually some steps before an appeal can actually sort of ripen. So I would expect getting into the courts sometime in the next couple of months, and then the actual substantive review could be, some period of time after that.
Hi, Commissioner. So I want to also ask you about USF contribution reform as part of this net neutrality proceeding. As you probably are well aware, several groups have, throughout this last couple of weeks, asked the FCC to issue some kind of notice seeking comment on how biased providers could be potentially part of the contribution base and looking at other reform avenues. So assuming that this item does hold up in court and, calls for USF contribution reform continue, what do you want that to look like, or how do you envision this looking like under a net neutrality framework?
Yeah. For my part, I strongly oppose the idea that we should take the existing contribution system, which is a 30% assessment on the existing, until this is effective, the existing Title II telecom portion of your bills, and simply shift that over onto the broadband data portion of the bill, whether as it is today or in the future. I think that would effectively result in rate shock, where consumers' prices that they pay on those monthly bills would increase. And I think particularly at a point in time when there's a lot of focus on affordability, I think it would be a mistake to do that. I put out my own idea maybe 2 or 3 years ago at this point that we should look at bringing in large technology companies that benefit from these expenditures and ask them to kick in a fair share. There's a limited opportunity for the FCC to do that. The FCC certainly, in my view, doesn't have the authority to do everything that I'd like to see as a policy matter in terms of looping large technology companies in. But as you probably know, there are discussions in Congress that are wrestling with some of these very same issues. So I would oppose any effort by the FCC to shift the contribution over to broadband. And frankly, I think if you look at the commission over the last couple of years, there hasn't been an expression of huge appetite that I've seen towards that. If you look at our report that we issued to Congress, I believe it was in August of last year or the year before that, either 22 or 23, we issued a report to Congress on the future of USF. And in that document, I think you saw a lot of comments from, at least the document, that wasn't sort of a full bear hug of this idea that broadband should be contributing and picking up entirely for USF.
Thanks, Commissioner. So you've been very clear that you're opposed to the FCC having this Title II regulation over broadband. I'm curious what you think appropriate regulation should look like for the sector if broadband providers are blocking websites or discriminating against certain websites. What sort of recourse should consumers have?
Yeah. So I think part of the answer to this goes back to a false picture that's been painted. So if you look at this item in particular, I think it's the second paragraph. It asserts that since 2017, there has been no federal oversight of broadband. And it leaves people with the impression, I think sort of reflected a little bit in your question, that if something goes wrong in the internet ecosystem, there is no cop on the beat to step in. And the answer is that is not the reality as a legal landscape right now. So right now, broadband providers are fully regulated by the FTC under their authorities, and that addresses all sorts of unjust and discriminatory practices. In fact, there are many, many, many actors in the internet ecosystem that are subject to those regulations, and in fact, the vast majority of the actors in the internet ecosystem that can engage in discriminatory conduct, including big tech, cloud providers, are not going to be subject to Title II regulation. So this idea that there is no cop on the beat, and by putting Title II in place, there will be fully a cop on the beat, doesn't accurately portray it. There is a cop on the beat, the FTC today. In fact, there are 2 cops on the beat. Just last year, we adopted a digital equity order that gives the FCC almost unbounded authority to regulate nearly every aspect of how the internet works. So whether it's the FTC today or the FCC itself under a digital equity order, which applied to Title I broadband, there are multiple cops on the beat to address the types of concerns, if they arise, that you mentioned. But then again, as a macro level, I think market power is important here. And whatever the merits of the net neutrality debate when they started in 2005, I think if you compare the market power of ISPs today and the level of competition today to when it started, it's fundamentally different. So even just if we were in a situation without a cop on the beat, which again, we're not, but if we were, there's a tremendous amount of sort of market influencing factors that could also be brought to bear. But that's not, in the main, what I'm relying on for my argument. In the main, it is the actual positive law held by both the FTC and FCC today.
Why would it be better for FTC to be the cop on the beat?
Well, because a couple reasons. When you apply Title II to the internet, it comes with a host of additional heavy-handed regulations that have nothing to do with the types of net neutrality and similar rules that you articulated. Second, and most fundamentally, it's a question of, do we have the power to do it? And as sort of laid out at the outset of my decision, it's better for it to remain with the FTC because, in fact, I don't believe the FCC has the power to apply Title II or Title II regulations to the internet. So there's no gap today, and the authority, in my view, is clear with the FTC. And again, think about the FTC. They regulate some of the most complex, complicated markets and sub-segments of markets in technology, in connectivity. And they're the nation's premier consumer protection agency. So there's no gap today. I don't think there's a gap in expertise either. But more importantly, even if you believed all those things, that would take you back to Congress, not what I view as a power grab. Thanks. No speeding up the asking of questions here. We got to, one at a time.
Hi, Commissioner.
That was a throttling joke for the ones that get it, but didn't go over very well.
On TikTok, what's any thoughts on that holding up in court? And if divestment is not realistic within the timeframes that Congress has passed, what then? What needs to be done then? And what's the FCC's role in this, if any, directly?
Yeah. Well, as I indicate, I'm really pleased with where things landed on the TikTok debate. And, obviously I, don't spare my fair share of criticism of the Biden administration, but this is one where they showed actually a lot of important leadership. This is one where there were some people that criticized it and said, look, you can't ban TikTok. There were polls that showed that particularly people that use TikTok over-indexed in terms of being part of a Democrat base. And so there were some people that wondered whether the Biden administration would really sort of push hard to get this across the finish line. And in fact, they did. And I think they deserve credit for standing strong on an issue of national security. To your point, TikTok has indicated they'll go to court. There's at least 270 days before the actual sort of divestiture deadline kicks in. So I guess the first question is, does TikTok go to court immediately? Or do they eat into the 270-day clock a little bit before they do go to court? But either way, they will. Then they'll lodge their arguments. I think they'll raise a couple. I imagine one of the first things that they're going to argue is the First Amendment. This is one that I spent a lot of time with. And the answer here, in my view, is actually very straightforward, which is Supreme Court's First Amendment law draws a distinction between regulations based on conduct on the one hand and content on the other. This is based on conduct. It's based on the nefarious data flows that they didn't discuss. It's based on the surveillance. And so I think this is a pretty easy case under the First Amendment. They may argue bill of attainder as well, but there too the law is clear. A lot of people look at bill of attainder and they say, well, if you name a company by name in a statute, that's a bill of attainder, and that's not bill of attainder law at all. What courts look at is is it a backward-looking, is it a punishment for backward-looking conduct like you would do in a judicial proceeding? Then it's maybe a bill of attainder. But here, this is a forward-looking prophylactic measure for national security. That's the same with Huawei and Kaspersky Lab. Both of those companies were named in specific statutes. Both went to court and raised bill of attainder arguments, and both were turned back very quickly by the courts. Now, they may point to a Montana case, which involved the First Amendment as well, but the key distinguishing point with the Montana case is that the district court there didn't believe that the state had a legitimate interest in regulating TikTok because, under the court's reasoning, TikTok involved a matter of national security and foreign policy, which Congress has authority, not the state. So that Montana case is not analogous here because what was missing in that case, according to the court, was valid exercise of state power. Plainly, we have that here because Congress has the power in the Constitution to pass a law like this. So to go to court, I believe the U.S. is going to win that case. And then ultimately, it comes to a decision point for, in my view, the CCP, which is, do they allow the divestment to go forward? Do they take their toys and go home? Do they sell customers but keep the algorithm? I think all of that is yet to be played out.
Thank you, Commissioner. I want to stay on China for the moment. So I want to ask you two questions. One, do you agree with the chair's contention that the Title II order is necessary for the Commission to reassert or assert authority over the Chinese telecom's ability to offer bias services in the U.S.? And secondly, do you think beyond today's order that gives them 60 days from the time of its effective date to stop the use of services, are there any other actions the Commission should take to prevent Chinese telecoms from being involved in the carrying of U.S. internet traffic, either through POP or other ways that traffic is routed?
I am always happy to move here at the FCC to do whatever we can to address the threats posed by entities that are beholden by the CCP. And let me walk through sort of really quickly the factual scenario here, because I think it helps sort of shed light on the situation. We revoked, obviously, the 214s of China Mobile based on a finding that they were effectively beholden to the CCP. They have continued since then to do various lines of business in the U.S. without the need for a Title II authorization, including cloud services, data center services, apparently, private services. What I said over a year ago was that we at the FCC should look at the entities that do have Title II authorizations before today, and prohibit them from interconnecting with those entities that are still doing business without authorizations, whether it's a 214, whether it's a cable landing license. There's some point in which that traffic is going to be hitting a licensed network. And I've said a long time ago we should explore doing that. The government has not explored doing that. What we're doing now is we're applying Title II to bias, and we're giving everyone a Title II authority, and we are revoking it, the item says, as those entities. But the FCC right now has a database of all entities that are providing bias. And that database does not list any of those Chinese entities. Why is that? My understanding is the reason why is because they're offering cloud services and data center services and private services that don't qualify as bias. If they've been doing something that constitutes bias, then we should have taken enforcement action against them a while ago for failing to identify themselves in our BDC data collection, which where we list every broadband provider in the country. So based on that evidence, it seems to me that reclassifying the internet as Title II and saying that we're giving them Title II licenses and asking them to turn any of those in that they have, I think any is doing a lot of work because it doesn't look to me like they have them. And so that's why I think we should do what I said we should do a while ago, which is look at the entities that do have them and prohibit interconnection. But step back even further than the FCC. Commerce Department has existing authorities today that would allow them to go after any entity regardless of the exact regulatory classification based on being beholden to the CCP. So if the federal government believes, as I actually do believe, that these entities shouldn't be doing business here, we can and should do that without Title II. It's, for the reasons I've laid out, far from clear that Title II reaches them, and it's certainly not the case that Title II is necessary or can be justified on the basis of going after those entities.
You mean through like an entity listing? Is that what you're talking about through BIS entity listing? Is that what you're?
Yeah, the Commerce Department, ICTS supply chain rules.
Okay.
Yeah. Anything else?
A follow-up, if I can?
Round two.
Completely unrelated to net neutrality. Can you comment about the allegations that Byron Allen sunk the standard Tegna deal by putting influence on the chair and lawmakers such as Nancy Pelosi?
I saw the headline of this report just in our press clippings before the meeting, so I haven't clicked through to it. I think I made my voice clear on Standard General Tegna, and I disagree with the process that the FCC laid out there. I thought it should have been handled differently, as my sort of full statements laid out, but without having clicked through beyond the headline, nothing more to sort of add at this point. Okay, thanks all, appreciate it.